has been a tonal shift in Boruto's to Blue Vortex, and it may lead to the destruction of the world that we've been anticipating for years now. And the driving force behind that tonal shift is Jura. And while this isn't necessarily all that surprising, as obviously the antagonists have to antagonize the story, this rather clear shift in Jura's mentality towards the furtherment of humankind through forced evolution not only shows us that Boruto is aligning itself more and more with its parent manga with every single chapter, but also basically buries any theory that people have been crafting that the future that we saw, where Boruto and Kawaki are standing upon the broken Hokage faces over a destroyed Konoha being an alternative universe dreamt up by the 10 paths, dead in the ground. See, because much in the same way that we were scrambling to figure out how combat was going to start between Ryo and Matsuri in Team 7 and 2/3 for the story to lob us the simplest possible explanation as to how this battle could begin, which is just, oh hey, Konohamaru's bad at talking to girls and Ryo was onto us from the start. Jura making an ideological switch from curious about humanity to curious about evolving humanity, plus the door on Boruto's possible storylines wide open, making universes like where all of Konoha is turned into additional Shinju that Kawaki and Boruto have to battle against, or Jura simply just deciding to eradicate all humanity so Shinju can rule over the planet, equally possible futures. And thus today, I want to talk about this ideological change from Jura and what it could possibly mean for the future of Boruto. Because today, we're talking Jura has finally become an antagonist. But before we get to talking on anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And I just want to say before we move into today's video, guys, while we have been consistent over the last week and a half or 2 weeks while I've been away from home in our posting, we're unfortunately pretty rapidly running out of banked videos. And my voice still hasn't fully recovered from being intubated for my anesthesia tattoo. And if we're being entirely real, my mental health is about as bad as it's ever been. The combination of some of my closest friends going through some tough times, the fact that I'm getting ironic death threats that say people who risk their life to get a tattoo should just go ahead and die anyways, and a couple of other growth and career perspective issues that are going on with YouTube right now has led me to a relatively dark place. So if I missed some uploads, I apologize. Recovery looks different for different people, and I'm trying my best for you. On to the video. So we've already brought up the idea of Jura's ideological shift a couple of times in this video, but what exactly are we talking about? Well, chapter 19 did mostly focus on Konohamaru failing every single possible speech check with Matsuri, and the battle between the Genin of Team 7 and 2/3 versus Ryu. Interspersed into all of these key moments was Jura having an ideological conversation with Hidari and the Bug Shinju. And this conversation got to a place that the Naruto universe hasn't ever directly gotten to before, but has flirted with multiple times. See, fundamentally, the conversation that Jura was having with the two other Shinju inside of the Shinju hideout boiled down to two things. Is one, that the biggest weakness of humanity is their consciousness and intelligence. Now, to be a bit more specific here, Jura talks about how the intelligence and consciousness of humans has stopped their evolution. That things like reasoning has allowed for the weak to survive in humanity and thus halting human evolution. And in a sense here, Jura's not wrong. While humanity has absolutely gotten stronger over the course of 1,000 or so years in the Naruto universe, it's not necessarily because of evolution. It's more to do with the fact that over the course of multiple times throughout Naruto's history, outside factors have injected their powers into humanity. Whether that be Kaguya giving the world chakra, Ashura and Indra reincarnating into each generation, or the Otsutsukis introducing common markings to the likes of Kawaki, Code, and Boruto, the majority of human evolution has come from outside factors. And therefore, this halted evolution talking point isn't necessarily inaccurate, and it's a talking point that we see reflected in humankind today, in our real world. However, if anybody ever does try to tell you that, oh, humankind stop evolving because we keep all the weak alive, those people are idiots. One, we are still evolving, but evolution takes thousands of years, and therefore we can't conceptualize exactly how fast we are evolving. And two, evolution doesn't always have to look like a long neck or bigger eyes. Humans are pack animals, a supplementary hive mind. You, with a middle school education, know more than some of the greatest scholars of 5 centuries ago. That's evolution. That's a shared experience. That's intelligence altering us as a species. However, because a lot of people can't conceptualize that as evolution because it's not longer tail feathers or bigger shoulder muscles, conversational talking points like this get brought up all the time, just not necessarily in Naruto. If you really paint with an incredibly broad brush, the antagonist motivation of every character in Naruto is that society is broken in some way and that they're gonna fix it with whatever crazy idea they have. Nagato, Obito, Madara, Kisame, all of the members of the Akatsuki all had their own individual reasons for wanting to accomplish the Eye of the Moon plan. However, the Eye of the Moon plan isn't evolution, it's heaven. And therefore, quite honestly, the Akatsuki's desire for the Eye of the Moon plan goes directly against the idea of evolution because it would cease humanity's growth at all. And the motivation of every single Otsutsuki, from Toneri to Momoshiki to Ishiki, has all also directly railed against the idea of evolving humanity, as the antagonistic desires of every Otsutsuki is simply to delete humanity and use all of their power for a chakra fruit. Or I guess just in the case of Toneri, to restart humanity. But not because they're broken biologically, but rather societally. And thus, even though it might feel as though a new life form talking about the need to evolve humanity feels like something we've heard about in Naruto, it's actually not. It is a completely fresh and new idea in the Naruto universe. Not a new and fresh idea in anime, but in the Naruto universe. And thus, what does this mean for the continuance of said Naruto universe? Well, I believe that Jura's ideology swapping at this point in Blue Vortex is meant to show us that Konoha will not be safe for much longer. But what does that mean? Well, as we all know, in Chapter 1 and Episode 1 of Boruto, we see a destroyed Konoha that Kawaki and Boruto are standing over. And while this moment doesn't necessarily lend any credence or any tips to how Konoha was destroyed, as both Kawaki and Boruto in this moment appear to be somewhat roughed up, it's not crazy to assume that they're the people responsible. However, it's also not crazy to assume that they were responsible for the failed defense of Konoha. See, I've been pretty forthright in my analysis of Boruto up until this moment, and I'm willing to fully admit that from Mikimoto's standpoint, Jura being fascinated with Konoha and wanting to read books from there is simply a way for him to stall out the plot. In the same way that Matsuri screaming at Konohamaru to let her call him Konohamaru-chan is a way for Konohamaru to survive long enough so that the rest of Team 7 and 2/3 can come help him in the upcoming battle against her. There's narrative reasons that things happen in universes to make the story flow better, to get rid of plot holes, to set up future timelines, and thus Jura's interest in Konoha's science, archaeology, and people being the reason that he hasn't swept in and grabbed Himawari by the scruff of her neck and consumed her, were simply a way to make sure that the viewers weren't asking questions that Ikimoto didn't necessarily have answers to. However, now, the combat has already kicked off between Matsuri, Ryu, and Team 7 and 2/3. This time of armistice between Jura and Konoha doesn't necessarily need to exist forever. See, because for so long as Jura had no interest in destroying Konoha, Himawari could just simply be left in Konoha. But unfortunately, that doesn't really make any sense because we know at some point Konoha is destroyed, and while there could be another antagonist responsible for that, we're now almost 20 chapters into Blue Vortex, and none of the Shinju are gone yet. So for all intents and purposes, it appears as though the Shinju are going to be the Akatsuki of our Blue Vortex. And if the head of those Akatsuki in the Shinju is Jura, who has no interest in destroying Konoha, then the idea that Konoha one day ends up destroyed is kind of a big question mark. Which is why Jura's ideological shift is so incredibly important. This now means that the fight can be brought to Konoha. In fact, it seems as though to confirm that it will be brought to Konoha. Because even though the idea of an antagonist who wants to evolve humanity is new to the Naruto universe, the structure of Blue Vortex is not. In fact, Blue Vortex has almost been a beat-for-beat copy of Shippuden, whether that was Team 10 being involved in an important battle that led to the eventual death of one of their teammates in Inojin/Asuma, or the story having the first big post-time skip battle happen outside of the Land of Fire and rather in the Land of Wind, like with Sasori versus Sakura. The similarities between Shippuden and Blue Vortex are too many to ignore, especially when you consider the fact that the event that starts both of these battles in the Land of Wind is the pseudo-death of Gaara. But if you guys remember, pretty much the most important plot point that happened after the battle in the Land of Wind against Sasori and Deidara were things like Jiraiya's battle against Nagato, the presumed biggest bad in the Akatsuki. And then after that, the Konoha Crush arc, where Nagato destroyed all of Konoha. And so if we identify Jura's shift in ideology and realize that it allows him to become the antagonist that we all thought he should be, the chances that Blue Vortex continues to follow in the footsteps of the timeline of Shippuden seems even more likely, which could mean a couple of things. 1, the death or close death of Kashin Koji. 2, eradication. Or 3, forced evolution. See, if we treat Matsuri and Ryu like Sasori and Deidara from the Kazekage rescue arc, that means that this upcoming battle against Team 7 and 2/3 is not going to shake out their way, which will most likely lead to the death of Matsuri, but maybe not Ryu. Or maybe Ryu, but not Matsuri. As after all, after the Kazekage rescue arc, while Sasori does die, Deidara doesn't. This allows for Deidara to still be a relevant character by the time that is the one-on-one fight against Sasuke, a much more important and hyped up moment than the Sakura versus Sasori fight. And I think there is a much more compelling argument to be made that Matsuri is going to be the one to survive this scuffle with Team 7 and 2/3 than Ryu. See, there is 1, the obvious fact that she isn't locked in combat with Konohamaru yet. 2, the much less obvious fact that she is the person responsible for making all additional traditional Shinju, at least so far as we currently understand. On top of this, if Ryu's eliminated, we get characters like Shinki and Gaara back. While if Matsuri is eliminated, we get characters like Moegi back. Well, Moegi's a really cool, very important character, not nearly as important as the Kazekage and his adoptive Iron Sand controlling son. And therefore, Moegi's role in the two Blue Vortex universe could take a pretty drastic shift after this Team 7 and 2/3 encounter. See, because while she is currently the cornerstone of the conversation that Jura's having with the likes of Hidari, talking about how the Shinju as a whole need to overcome the weakness that is love and consume the people they're obsessed with in order to get over this weakness, a true and physical sign of their evolution that humanity isn't willing to undergo. If Jura wants to undergo one of the routes we're about to talk about, the evolution route, Matsuri being a continued presence in his life is massively important. But if the arc that we're currently in Two Blue Vortex does follow the Kazekage rescue arc to a T, then the next logical thing that would need to happen if we're truly following Shippuden's playbook would be that Kashin Koji needs to get involved in the fight. And what's crazy is this is not unlikely. See, obviously everyone believed that the reason that Kashin Koji was injected into the story as a pseudo Jiraiya replacement is that so one day Naruto would finally get to be able to reconnect with Jiraiya through the medium of his clone, but still. However, even though Kashin Koji has narrowly escaped death before in his battle against Ishiki, and currently has access to the Ten Paths, an ability that allows him to see his own future, there's a fairly decent chance that Kashin Koji gets involved in the fight against the Shinju, and it doesn't go well for him. See, if you take a step back and think about chapter 19, another small through line that was happening while all of these battles were going on was the fact that Ada was relaying all of the information about these ongoing battles to Kashin Koji and Boruto. And while Boruto stood up and was getting ready to jump to the aid of Team 7 and 2/3, if you remember, Kashin Koji told Boruto that he can't fight against the Shinju. And not because Kashin Koji is worried about Boruto not being able to beat the likes of Ryu or Matsuri, but rather because Kashin Koji understands that if Boruto gets involved, then so does Jura. And thus, if you're trying to avoid the involvement of Jura, but still make sure that Team 7 and 2/3 came out with all of their heads in one piece, who would you send? Kashin Koji or Boruto? The same line of logic could apply to fights even beyond the spectrum of this Team 7 and 2/3 fight. After the conclusion of this Land of Wind arc, there's a solid possibility that there's another fight against more Shinju. And in those fights, there's going to be the same conversation point. Hey, Boruto, if you go get involved, then Jura's going to get involved, and then we're all kind of screwed. See, because for as long as Kawaki doesn't have his offensive output completely maxed, Boruto doesn't stand a chance in combat against Jura. And therefore, Boruto's not going to get involved in any fights against the Shinju until Kawaki is strong enough to fight alongside him. And thus, the only real person who can be sent in as a legitimate backup in the battle against the Shinju, who doesn't stand any possible threat of being consumed, is Kashin Koji. You can't send Himawari because Jura wants her. You can't send Boruto because Jura will get involved in the fight. Kakashi is nowhere to be found. Tsunade is too old. Sakura, for some reason, doesn't fight anymore. Sasuke's in a tree, and Naruto's in the Daikoku-ten. And thus, the stage has absolutely been set for Kashin Koji to re-enter the world of combat. And this would most likely, ironically, come in a fight against Jura. Subtle callback to his battle against Ishiki, and possible hint about Jura's true personality. And while I'm not going to sit here and say that Kashin Koji stands any chance against Jura, out of quite literally everybody in the universe of Boruto, he stands a top 5 chance. And on top of all this, his death would obviously be a reference to Jiraiya's death, the impact that it had on Naruto, and it would get rid of the relatively pesky ability from a writer's perspective of the Ten Paths. Now, if we're continuing with the idea of building Two Blue Vortex around Shippuden's timeline, this would mean that the next big thing would be Konoha's destruction, something that's already been confirmed to be on the way and would draw a direct parallel to Nagato's Shirai Tensei. But the real question here is, how does Konoha get destroyed? And thus, I'll harken back to those two possibilities I talked about earlier: evolution or extermination. In the very beginning of this video, I said that two possible futures have popped up, and they stand equal chances of occurring. Those two possible universes are forced evolution or extermination. The idea that either Jura will simply just get sick of humanity and decide to get rid of all of them, allowing the Shinju to rule over the planet, or the idea that Jura will try to use the claw grimes in order to turn all of humanity into that of Shinju. And like I said, I believe both of these futures stand equally possible chances of occurring. So let's talk about them alphabetically, with the first up being evolution. See, as we've already seen in the battle of Ryu versus Areya, Yodo, Mitsuki, and Sarada, the Shinju have access to a variable army of modified claw grimes. And while Ryu absolutely had the ability to turn Yodo into a claw grime tree that could possibly have been turned into a Shinju in this last chapter, rather than capitalizing on that moment, Ryu rather took the claw grime that was biting Yodo and and toss it into another claw grind because Orea's lodestone sword was stuck in it. And while the situation didn't end up with Yodo becoming a Shinju, it introduces a very interesting possibility that really any and all combat against the Shinju could lead to padding their numbers. And in fact, we've already seen multiple people who aren't main characters bitten by claw grinds and turned into trees. So really, at any point, presumably those people could also be turned into Shinju. And this is why Matsuri holds so much importance in the story. As the perceived, let's call her mother of the Shinju, she holds on to the means of production for all Shinju. And therefore, as long as she's around and kicking, more Shinju can be made, which means that numbers can be swayed from humanity over to the side of the Shinju. Oh, we lost Ryu, okay, but we bit Yodo, so maybe we can turn Yodo into a Shinju. And each and every single time we do this, it looks worse and worse for humanity. It's like zombies, but if they were stronger than humans. Now, if Jura was trying to find a way to ensure that the Shinjus are successful in their endeavor of combat against humanity, this would be the most surefire way to accomplish that. However, we don't fully understand the complete ins and outs of the creation of a Shinju. Making them may not be as easy as I'm currently making it sound to be. But however, since Jura did talk about the Shinju superiority to humans in the last chapter, and how by acting more in accordance with their primal and basal natures that they're able to evolve further beyond humans could ever imagine, the idea that Jura already believes that the Shinju are the next evolutionary step and therefore the superior being to humanity has already and will become even more so an incredibly pervasive talking point. However, what if turning humans into Shinju was incredibly difficult, which is why some of the side characters that we saw bit in the earliest chapters of Boruto haven't turned into Shinju yet. Or even worse for the Shinju, what if Matsuri dies in this battle against Team 7 and 2/3? Well, then Jura's answer could possibly change from evolution and the converting of as many humans into Shinju as possible into simple extermination. See, Jura could very easily identify that the reason that Matsuri was taken out in this battle against Team 7 and 2/3 was her weakness. Love. And therefore, in order to eliminate all possible weaknesses that could affect the evolutionary process of the Shinju, and therefore Jura decides that the best way to ensure that the Shinju never fall into the emotional trappings of humanity is to destroy humanity itself, leading to a mass extinction event of sorts, where the Shinju, who mind you, there's currently exactly 5 of right now, all dedicate on a personal level one of the 5 major villages to destroy. Not only would this do a really good job of reincorporating the entirety of Naruto's world into Boruto's story, as if Boruto has done one thing poorly, it's not learned from Naruto and tap into the other cool places on the map that aren't named Konoha, but also this keeps the scale of what the antagonists are trying to accomplish as high as when we were dealing with the Otsutsuki. The only current problem with the Shinju right now is that their desires aren't 100% identifiable. However, if Jura, and therefore all the other Shinju's desire, is the mass extinction of all humanity, not only would that ally Jura with the desires of the Otsutsuki, but it would also have the added bonus of keeping the stakes of the antagonists in Boruto at an equal level of terrifying. And considering the fact that we have 1, already see Konoha destroyed, and 2, multiple times heard Koshi and Koji talk about how if Boruto was taken out by the Shinju, it will lead to the end of humanity as we know it, this mass extermination route could absolutely be the way that Jura decides to go. See, because the more that Jura learns, the more dangerous he becomes. The only thing stopping Jura from destroying all of humanity right now as is his desire to learn as much from humanity as possible so he can figure out what's going on inside of his noggin. However, now that Jura's begun to ideate and theorize about what he wants, it's safe to say that the day is fast approaching where he's going to learn all that he believes he needs to know from humanity. But in both of these situations, both evolution and extermination, the prospects for Konoha are the same. Destruction. Whether it's claw grimes flooding through the walls of Konoha like it's chapter 1, while the Shinju press the offensive trying to turn as many citizens of Konoha into usable Shinju, or simply the Shinju coming in like Nagato and razing the entirety of the strongest village on Earth to get rid of humanity in a one fell swoop action. Neither of these options brings sunshine and rainbows to the front doors of Konoha's citizens. The destruction of Konoha and the fact that we do believe that Blue Vortex is following the blueprint of Shippuden brings up a rather interesting point. See, because the destruction of Konoha in Shippuden was A, over ideological differences, and B, not the end of Shippuden. And since Blue Vortex does seem to be going bar for bar with Shippuden, we've already identified the fact that if Jura was to either go for the extermination route or the evolution route, it would be because of the ideological differences between him and all of humanity, as he believes himself to be the next step in evolution beyond humanity, and obviously humanity doesn't believe that. But that would mean some shadowy figure is going to be stepping in as the key the antagonist beyond Jura. Some shadowy figure that, like with Obito, we're already aware of and have seen. And it's that shadowy figure who's been pulling the strings from the darkness, or maybe from the light, that in a post-destroyed Konoha world is going to start the true and final conflict of Boruto. And I believe that Boruto's Obito is none other than Amado, who will eventually kick off some kind of 5th grade shinobi world war, which will eventually be capped by Shibai, who is Boruto's Kaguya. And while this is kind of a thing that I've been rallying against for a long time, as Kishimoto and Ikimoto have both said that they didn't want Boruto to be a hollow copy of Naruto, and I've not only agreed with them in that mentality, but also appreciated the differences that they've made, I just simply can't ignore the fact that Jura is being set up as an antagonist who has every single right and reason to destroy Konoha in a somewhat similar timeline to Nagato. And Jura, as intimidating as he is not the final antagonist of this story. He doesn't have the weight, he doesn't have the oomph, he came out of nowhere. He will do a good job of carrying the water until the real antagonist, plot twist, rug pull out from under us, is revealed in a very similar way to how another person with 2 Rinnegan was able to carry the water of Shippuden until the true bad guy could be revealed. So all this is to say is that chapter 19, for me at least, has revealed that Boruto 2 Blue Vortex is going to be a whole lot closer to Shippuden than even I anticipated. But I'm curious to hear from you guys. Do you believe that 2 Blue Vortex is on its way to be a completely unique and different story, or do you think it's about to be Shippuden 2.0? Tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Now, if you'll excuse me, it's a powder day, and I want to go ski.